Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Nicci Chats 2. This is a show that I do on a weekly basis, which is all centered around shifting people's perspectives and giving them a new view on the world by sharing different ideas and different stories. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Nicci Stewart, and I run a company called The Y Effect that specializes in shifting perspectives and changing the way people see the world. Today, I am really excited to be talking to Cindy Ross. Cindy is a multi-potentialite, which is my new favorite word. But more importantly, and for the purposes of today's conversation, she is a specialist in cross-border legal work, employee relations, and she has a vast experience in these fields, both with corporates and with NGOs. And she's also a specialist in employee relations and negotiations. But the reason why I'm very excited, well, I use the word excited loosely because this is not necessarily a topic any of us want to be discussing, but we have to. But Cindy and I are going to be chatting about the war in the Ukraine today. And she has inadvertently, unbeknownst to herself, signed what I call an NJA, which is a non-judgment agreement. So that means she has to tolerate all of my potentially ignorant and stupid questions, because that's why we're here, to actually get deeper into this. So Cindy, welcome. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for having me and giving me the platform to raise my views on what's currently happening.
It's an absolute pleasure. So Cindy and I connected when we didn't quite get into a bit of a debate about something that she shared on LinkedIn, and we started having a discussion in the comments. And based on what she said, I just took one look at this and I thought, I have to connect with this woman. I really want to talk to her, and I really want to bring her in to share her views. So thanks for that, Cindy. So let's get straight into it. There's this war happening in the Ukraine. Most of us do know what's going on kind of at a high level, day to day, what's happening. But there's a lot going on at a deeper level that I just feel is it's overwhelming. There's a lot of information. There's a lot of dots that need to be connected. And I feel like I'm building a puzzle of a face, and I've literally got like the pieces for an eyelash. And Cindy, that's one of the main reasons why I wanted to chat to you today. So I think if we can get straight into it, my first question to you is, who or what is NATO? I know what it stands for. I keep hearing Russia, NATO. I keep seeing these words being thrown around, but I don't really know how to contextualize this in the bigger picture. So can you shed some light on that for me?
Okay, so effectively, I think who NATO is a question that everybody has had currently. So NATO, the full name is called the North Atlantic Treaty. They were started in, I think it's 1949, and it was as defense. They teamed up. I think there were 12 countries at the time that teamed up as defense against the then Soviet Union. So it was really just a club of countries getting together to say, okay, if the Soviet Union attacks any of us, all of us have the right to then attack them back. NATO over the years has grown to 30, I think it's 30 nations currently that's part of NATO. And I think why it's important to have this discussion as part of the whole context of war is I keep reminding people they can't just look at what's currently happening. They have to go back to the past to see where we come from. And that would inform why Putin feels so strongly at the moment to protect, or what he feels is protecting his country. I think it was early 1970s. When the Soviet Union was disbanded and when actually NATO started, there was a Warsaw Pact that was started at the time. So this was East European countries that teamed up because they at the time felt that NATO was a threat to them. The Warsaw Pact was disbanded after the Soviet Union. And I think that begs the question, why is NATO still around? And why is NATO still growing? And that is the same question that Russia has, is why are they still growing? And I think Putin had also in one of the conversations, I can't remember when it was, but it is in one of his speeches recently, had also said, can we go back to the 1970s? And why the 1970s is important, I think, in context of this is that is where all of these countries got together. Soviet Union was disbanded. The threat to NATO was gone, effectively. That's why the Warsaw Pact was also disbanded at the time. NATO continued advancing over the years to the east of Europe. Numerous times during this time, the previous president of Russia had also said, stop advancing because you're a threat if you advance further. There was agreement signed, which USA now vehemently denies, despite all of the minuted documents around it, saying where they agreed, and there's video footage, all of this, it's something that can openly be YouTube, where they had agreed that the NATO would not move past Germany. As we know, as it stands today, they've moved way past Germany and they continue to advance. And then it was, I think it's important for us to note I think it's 2007, Putin at the annual Munich conference, he had addressed the Munich conference and said, I see that NATO consistently advances despite all of the other agreements. And at that time, they weren't close to Ukraine. And he had said, I think he used the words to say this is his final warning to NATO, to say that if they come anywhere near Ukraine, Ukraine for him is his red line. And that is going to then incite other conversations. So effectively, like I said, NATO over the years has painted themselves as this peacekeeping force that goes around peacekeeping. But when you look at the stats and the wars they have fought, you have to sit and beg the question, like, why are these people here? One of them that is, I think two that pops out for me is what happened in Libya and then what happened in Iraq. So Iraq obviously happened first, where USA at the time, very vocal about there being nuclear weapons in the country.
So that was just to kind of clarify, those nuclear weapons, those were the ones that they deemed the weapons of mass destruction.
Yes.
That's okay.
And that was so that was their reason for at the time advancing into Iraq. Till today, we're all still waiting for the nuclear weapons. Saddam Hussein was killed because he was labeled this horror to his country completely destroyed. Then fast forward to Libya, where at the time, I can't remember which year it was, but Muammar Gaddafi had made a public statement to say that he feels, before I get to that, actually, the reason before Iraq was actually entered into, Saddam Hussein had publicly made a statement that he feels oil needs to be traded in euros. And he wanted a change from the US dollar, oil being traded in US dollars, to euros. Soon after that, the declaration was made that there's weapons of mass destruction in the country, which, like I said, till today was never found. Saddam Hussein was killed. Then you had
so why was that change in trading oil in a different currency? Why was that significant?
I think that begs the question that most people also don't want to deal with. It's a topic most people don't want to deal with, is that oil is effectively traded in US dollars, which makes the US currency stronger by virtue of that trading. So the technical term for what they call it is the petrodollar. Okay. And that is effectively what gives USA the level of influence and power it has. So anyone that threatens it by saying that it needs to be traded in Europe would then become the stronger power in this. So I think that is why I said I think people tend to forget how all these things fall into place in the conversation. And like I said, why I highlighted these two countries there was public comments and there's public documentation that speaks to these things. So people can go back, they can research and see whether I'm lying through my teeth, whether it's factual. But like I said, fast forward a few years, Muammar Gaddafi made a statement that he wanted to start a Central African Bank. He wanted Africa to back him, and he wanted to trade oil not in euros, but he wanted the oil at the time to be traded and backed by a pan-African currency, Again, this is a threat to the US dollar. And soon after that, what happened? USA backed liberation of the Libyan people, and Muammar Gaddafi is killed. So that's why, like I said, I think people need to start thinking that there's more to these things. And when all of these things were happening, at the background, Putin kept saying, but these people are a threat to the rest of our security. These people are a threat to the rest of our security. Currently, who's sitting the major force threatening the petrodollar? Again, it's Vladimir Putin.
Okay.
And that is why, like I said, when you hear any comments around NATO, it's normally USA speaking the loudest out of it. You hardly ever hear of any of the other countries. It's always USA informing the trend of the conversation. It's USA informing who's bad, who's good. And I think, like I said, that is why I just want people to question the timelines of these events happening, the relation it has to oil, the US dollar, and then why, like, important question is, why is NATO still here? Soviet Union isn't there anymore. And everywhere they've claimed there was a threat, history has shown us there wasn't a threat. So I think that is just the question I want people to sit with is, effectively NATO is Western countries that have gotten together. Everywhere they've highlighted threats. It's been in relation to oil, diamonds, gas. It's never been about human rights. Human rights is the face in which they come at countries, but it's never been effectively about that.
So just to kind of sum up what you're saying, so historically NATO is this USSR originally versus the West sort of pact that then fell by the wayside, and now we are where we are. So when you say NATO started advancing, what do you mean by that? What when you say they sort of advanced, they were supposed to stop at Germany and they advanced. What does that mean?
So by advancing, it's just they've brought in other member states. And I'm not trying to say that member states don't have the right. I feel every country has the right to decide where it wants to be, and sovereignty is not in question. Because I do think as South Africans, we wouldn't want someone bullying in us into certain agreements. So it's not right anywhere in the world. But I think in context, when we have conversations like this, where there are real threats, same way as South Africa, if we felt Namibia or Botswana was a real threat to us, we wouldn't sit back and do nothing about it. And we'd expect as citizens that our government wouldn't just leave us to the war. So by talking about advancement is, like I said, they were meant to stop at allowing countries from Germany to the north. They then started taking in membership to the east, which kept moving closer to the Russian border. And that was Vladimir Putin's major issue, is the threat kept coming closer. And throughout for years now, USA has made it very clear that they feel Russia is a threat. And he has consistently, like I said, I think it's important to go back to that Munich conference as well and actually watch the video where he discusses why he thinks it's a threat for them to move closer to his borders, and strategically why he felt Ukraine is a no for them.
Okay, that's very interesting. So what kind of was the catalyst for this invasion? I mean, you've given us a lot of context. What sparked it? Because, when I was kind of thinking about this conversation, there's a lot of questions that I have around the timing of this, not necessarily from a NATO perspective, but when we look at what's happening in the world around us, we are, I wouldn't quite say out of the woods, but we are teetering on the brink of the edge of the woods of the COVID pandemic ending. I mean, I know there are still a few hotspots. Is there some kind of am I being a conspiracy theorist? Am I making connections that aren't there? We've just come out of this really weird time, and now this happens. Is there some connection? Give me your opinion on that, your thoughts on that.
I think we all would just be speculating, because, like I said, the conversations around this has been ongoing. So it's not a conversation this threat of Ukraine and Russia saying that they don't want them anywhere near hasn't, like I said, it's been there since the 1970s. So I don't
Yes.
understand why now, because
Okay.
important to note as well is during the years, in 1997, June 1997, there was 15 policy experts, US policy experts, that wrote to the US government to say, your constant conversations about moving east is a threat to us. Ukraine is a threat. You're going to start a war. So these conversations, like I said, have been ongoing throughout the years. Why they decided to do this now, only they would know. I'm not part of the. I'm not a politician, so I
Fair
can't
enough.
speak to those things. But like I said, even a month before Putin actually went to war, he had told them, "I have said all I need from you is confirmation that they wouldn't be allowed into NATO, and all of this is over." And you wanted written confirmation. And the reason you wanted written confirmation from NATO was history again has shown they've consistently just reneged on agreements that there was, and advancing forward. So, like I said, I don't understand why it is, because most of the political commentators, various bodies have actually addressed this to say, can we leave this? There's no need to stir up this.
That's very interesting. So now getting to, let's get into the nitty-gritty of the actual war itself and what's happening, because there's a lot that I've been hearing that has made me incredibly uncomfortable, and that I've questioned. And we'll get to the specifics around South Africa now, because I do have some questions about that. So we keep hearing about sanctions. We keep hearing about this no-fly zone. There are all these terms that are being thrown around. So what are the benefits of the sanctions? What are the benefits or non-benefits of the no-fly zone? It hasn't been done. Why not? Can you tell me more about that?
I think effectively, specifically, I think in relation to the, what's it called, the no-fly zone. The reason Ukraine has obviously been calling for a no-fly zone, I think the reason NATO hasn't declared that there's a no-fly zone effectively is that would be declaring war against, and saying that they're going to start fighting with Russia. And effectively, that would then spark World War III in relation to this. Because as we all know, Russia's alliance and China's been very adamant in showing that they aligned there. So that would spark something that I think none of us want to get to there. And that is effectively, like I said, why NATO has decided, look, they're not. I think it's a bit hypocritical, though, that they keep saying this, because, like I said, there's a lot of propaganda in the media. And this is a lot from NATO countries, from Russia as well. So you don't really know how to sift through what's actually happening on the ground. But like I said, sending in mercenaries, you have to ask USA, why is Blackwater on the ground in Ukraine if you're saying you're staying out of this? It just means you have forced.
Who's Blackwater?
So Blackwater is a US-based mercenary group. People would have to Google them. So they effectively, because I think most people only hear the name in movies, so they think it's an organization that feature in movies. But they move very undetected in different areas and wars. And because it's a mercenary group, they don't effectively, your country sends them in, or they go into volunteer, which is what they normally say, to keep peace. It doesn't fall under international law. So Russia wouldn't be able, even if they're there, Russia wouldn't be able to say that USA or NATO has declared war on them. So you have to beg the question, why are they there? Because publicly, Biden keeps saying, this is not a war, we don't want war. He keeps threatening via NATO, but if you come closer, we're going to advance. So, like I said, nobody really knows the truth on the ground right now. I think each side is going to position themselves, and it's human, I think, to position yourself as the victim of all of this, because I think what they need to accept is war is war. There's no good guy in war. Both parties are effectively wrong. So I don't think anybody really understands what's going. I feel they're very hypocritical around their statements because they keep poking the bear, yet saying, but we don't want anything. And we're not going to do anything to start World War III.
Do you think the sanctions that have been imposed, do you think they can help? I mean, it's as a country as an individual who lived under sanctions, bigger picture and looking back at our own history, we can all see how they played a role in contributing to the fall of apartheid. It was one of the elements. Do you think in this case it's going to make a difference?
I think, the sanctions were done prematurely because obviously as corporates, if your country says sanctions, now you have you have resources, you have staffing, all of those things in a country. It affects business and it affects back home as well because there's employees, there's money that's lost on both sides. I think we're going to have to wait and see. I feel Putin was better prepared because of what happened with Afghanistan. Putin was way better prepared for this. And effectively, I'm glad you brought up SA as well. Under apartheid, South Africa was actually fine. The apartheid government with sanctions, they could sustain themselves internally. And most countries generally can sustain themselves internally. What tipped the scale for South Africa was the threat of civil war internally. It wasn't the sanctions, yes, it influenced a part of it, but what actually brought us to the negotiating table was the threat of civil war. There's speculation around that in Russia as well, because Ukrainian government loves saying, yes, but the Russians don't want this. There's a lot of Russians that are very pro what's happening right now. So again, you can't really see what it's going to be. And China has been very clear that they would offer support and financial and economic support. I also think that we underestimate how much we need the oil from that side. And I think corporate has really evidenced in this that they don't actually agree with sanctions. That is why Shell still went in saying, like, we can't take the risk of not having oil. And immediately when the sanctions came, I think USA also didn't count on the fact that the Saudi prince would also say, but hey, I'm not here to help you, and turn his back and use this as an opportunity for himself. So I think in this regard, we're all going to have to wait and see, because I think Putin is a very different ball game as to sanctioning a Venezuela or a Zimbabwe in the scheme of things. And I think nobody really foresaw how strong the alliance is between China and Russia.
Okay. Yeah, that's so a lot of what you're saying is I've got a lot of thoughts buzzing in my head. But now let's bring this closer to home. So this is, as South Africa, we are part of BRICS, which is obviously Russia and China as well. South Africa has taken a very, very particular stance on this, which I personally, I mean, to be blatantly honest, without my understanding, admittedly so, it made me angry because I'm hearing all of these things about, even Switzerland has, for the first time in half a century or whatever, declared that they are no longer neutral. I'm like, Switzerland is not neutral, and yet somehow South Africa is being this fence sitter. So tell me more about that and why we've taken the stance we have.
So officially the statement from DIRCO around our stance to stay neutral in this was based on the fact when the UN called for that Security Council meeting, they felt that they weren't being genuine because one of the key issues that Russia has is that part of the negotiations that need to go forward and need to happen needs to secure their security, which is effectively again saying Ukraine won't become a member state of NATO. We've heard NATO saying around the corridors and by the sideway, but nothing official, that we're actually not going to let them in. So why not just give the documentation then to say that needs to be in? But like I said, South Africa's stance was based on the fact, or the statement that we got was based on the fact that they felt that the meeting was disingenuous because it didn't address the security issues and the security concerns. And for that reason, they didn't want to participate. So South Africa has been very clear, I think, that we're against the war. We've been very clear that we feel that this needs to be negotiated. I think the world's response to this was also why South Africa is in a good place, whether we agree or not with who we're sending as South Africa, that we in a better position to negotiate and mediate these discussions because of our history, and that we had a peaceful transition in comparison to many other countries from our apartheid state to where we are now. And for that reason, people feel we'd be better suited to have this discussion. But like I said, I think South Africa just took the stance, and I wish they had said that more publicly, that our stance wasn't just like, hey, we don't want to pick a side, we don't want to fight with anyone. Our stance was that we felt that the conversations were disingenuous, and that there was no real intention to find peace, because in order to find peace, both sides need to have a voice. And negotiations is effectively give and take. And like I said, we haven't been pro-war, like a lot of people would say we're pro-war. Like, we've been very clear as a country, we're not pro-war. And that is why Cyril has offered and said, I will then be the person that comes in and mediates, because I think we still don't appreciate fully the respect the world has for us, whether we internally don't agree with what happened back then as South Africans. Effectively, we're still the pinnacle for having a safe transition and a peaceful transition.
Okay. So it's not necessarily the fence sitting that it actually appears to be. What we are pushing for is a peaceful, negotiated discussion as opposed to a conflict. That's very interesting. So
and the funny thing is, most political analysts and commentators also feel the only way this is going to be solved is around the table. So it's interesting to see that South Africa's position is really what informs a lot of what how everyone else also thinks it needs to be handled.
So I just want to touch on something, and this is kind of going back a little bit. You mentioned about the Ukraine joining NATO and that they wouldn't necessarily have joined anyway. Why do you say that? Do they not want to? Do they not? And this is probably one of those non-judgmental questions. Would they not have wanted to join? Why? Oh yeah, why?
I think they want to. I think the conversation has changed now that really the popo has hit the fan. NATO's conversation has changed because there's always been discussions. It wasn't just Ukraine. There's a few other countries that were in conversations to join NATO. So I just think to save face, they now saying, but hey, we never said, we were just talking about it. We never said anything. And it's also not to give, and this is really just me giving my opinion. I feel that it's not to give Putin any reason to attack any of their countries as well, because I think he's made it very clear. Anybody that interferes here, I'm coming for you next. So I just think the conversation has changed after the fact. And that's why I think earlier I raised the fact that I don't think this is as simple as having a discussion about the sovereignty of each state, because what I keep reminding people is, why is it that USA has the Monroe Doctrine? And effectively what the Monroe Doctrine says is that Canada, Mexico, or that there can't be any, like Russia or China effectively cannot have any missiles pointed at the USA from Canada, Mexico. And that's for their protection. So it's okay when they do it and they say it. Now Russia is really saying, okay, but I also want the Monroe Doctrine. And now it's like, but you can't say that because sovereignty, people can choose for themselves. Then why can't Russia then go and put missiles in Mexico and point it at USA? You would never allow Russia to go and point missiles from Cuba to USA. So I think that's why, like I said, it's not a simple question to say, okay, but we have sovereignty, we can decide what we want to do. There's bigger things at play. We need to look at it fully in context, because why is it USA is allowed to protect themselves, Russia isn't? He's now this big bully because he's trying to protect his country. where the actual perpetrators of human rights violations in the world always just sits back and says like, but people can't do it. But if it's a US bullet that hits you, it's fine. So I think those are the conversations people need to start having, that it's not really a clear cut, this one is right, this one is wrong. There's bigger things at play. I do feel as adults, they need to really just come to the table and sort it out, because it's people like us, normal, ordinary people that have nothing to do with this, that are losing our lives. And I think that's the sad thing, is because adults can't get to a table to discuss something. There's innocent kids and that are dying, that are going to die as a result of this, which isn't fair.
And it's, I mean, I must admit, it's one of the things that I've loved about several of our conversations, where I feel with you, there's definitely this constant underlying leaning towards human rights. And I think that was definitely one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you, that it is about the people. So Cindy, you mentioned the word, you've used it a couple of times, sovereignty. In this instance, or even in a broader instance, whichever you prefer, what does sovereignty mean? Because we understand that there was this big USSR, this Union of Soviet Socialist Republic, that broke up. These people became independent countries. What do you mean when you talk about sovereignty?
So sovereignty is just a country's ability to decide things for themselves. It's the same like South Africa deciding to join BRICS. USA couldn't come tell us, but you're too close to Russia, all of those things. So the only reason nothing happened there, I think, is South Africa's never been a threat to anybody. I think we're always the neutral ones. And I hope we keep it that way, that we've really never been a threat to any country. We're always seen as a friend of, and I prefer that we stay that way and not become the, like, because I'm sure none of us want war to come to our doors either. And like I said, so sovereignty really means it's a country's ability to choose what's best for itself. And that's why I'm saying I don't dispute that a country has the right to do that. And I think we all should have the right to do that. I'm just pointing the question to say, why is it that USA and NATO can infringe on other people's sovereignty? Because they infringed on Iraq's sovereignty, they infringed on Afghanistan, Syria, Palestine sovereignty. It's gone unanswered. They're now calling for war crimes at criminal court. They've never gone to one of the hearings where they have to appear on war crimes. I just want us to think about what is the difference here. Why is it now that Russia is the perpetrator? It's, we must all cry. When they were killing, they literally blew up the whole Middle East for oil. Nothing happened, no consequences. Palestinians till today are being bombed on their own land. Was fully funded by USA. What is the difference? And I think that is also why the racial context has come up to say, okay, what is going on? If it's people of color, it's almost like, okay, but you're all used to it. You'll have been killed and exploited for years. So what are you crying about? And now that it's moved to Europe, whereas the history of killing each other in any event, it's nothing new. Throughout history, there's been wars in Europe. Now it's national crisis, and that is why I think people need to start using their heads and thinking. And this has got to do with oil. It's got to do with the petrodollar. It's USA positioning themselves as a victim to try and save themselves in this instance.
That's very interesting. And I mean, just to contextualize that was actually where Cindy and I did connect, was over a post that she shared around the racist reporting. And it wasn't the first time I've seen that. It did come up several times. I mean, our discussion was about something separate, and we're still going to have that conversation. It might be over a cup of coffee, but we're still going to have that discussion. But yeah, it's incredibly interesting what you're saying. And I really love the fact that, yes, you're giving an opinion, but it's also more prompting people to go question this, question that, question the next thing. I don't have the answers, but we need to look deeper into this and we need to ask questions. So Cindy, once again, this is definitely, I'm asking you for your opinion. Do you think this conflict could have been averted or avoided altogether?
I think definitely it could have been avoided. And that's why I also feel, and this is, like I said, again, a personal opinion, that you can't have a bullying and poking someone, and now when they respond to being poked, You want to be like, how? But why are you responding? You're not allowed to respond to me fighting with you. And this is, I think, where I keep asking people, go back in history. Look at who is part of this, each person's history in this. Because even Nelson Mandela has also very publicly said USA has been the biggest perpetrators of human rights violations, yet has the audacity to sit and tell the rest of the world what is human rights and what is ethics. They've never been held accountable for anything. When you have on the other side, and I'm not saying Putin is innocent, but on the other side of this, you have Vladimir Putin, who to Africans supported us during liberation. The reason we have liberation right now is he trained up overseas, gave them the strategy, and it wasn't like he was doing it remotely from Russia. He was on the ground in Africa helping us in our liberation. So you have to start asking questions that, how do you as a bully that threatened me all my time, invaded? And I think it's the same position India took as, don't tell us to pick a side. India also very vocally said, don't tell us as USA to pick a side when you've literally invaded our country. Now you want us to come and support you. Why would we trust you in this fight? So I think everybody has taken the stance that I don't think anybody on earth besides the arms dealers and people that sell arms and explosives enjoy war and benefit off of war. So it's just, we need to start thinking about, you cannot just consume what media tells you is right and wrong, because we have a history that goes back where the very vocal ones right now, identifying who's bad and who's good, are the biggest perpetrators of murder across the world. And then you have on the other side, yes, he's also guilty. Trust me, he's not an innocent, and he's guilty of human rights violations as well. But in the same breath, he's also guilty of, which they like ignoring, the liberation of a lot of Africans that were oppressed. So, and that is where the context comes, that it becomes very difficult to not support to support him and start questioning why they're painting him the way that they're painting him. Because for a lot of us, we wouldn't have seen freedom had he not helped us.
So it just, I mean, the deeper and deeper we get into this, the more we realize how subtle this is and how nuanced it is, and how there are just so many layers to this conversation. And I have to admit that I'm quite glad and quite proud to be part of a country who is friends with everybody. I'm glad that you said that. That certainly makes me feel a lot better. But it just seems to me like the more you're talking, the more I'm starting to realize that this relationship, this NATO US, Russia or USSR, old USSR relationship, it's a toxic marriage in which people are abusing each other. And it's very easy when the one shows up at the hospital, so to speak, with a black eye to go, oh, you did this. But then the following week, the other one's showing up with a black eye, and then it's, oh, you did this. And it just depends on who's punching the hardest at the time, is the person who gets shouted at. But in essence, at any given time, we are both punching each other. And it's just digging into this more and more toxic relationship. Cindy, I just want to ask you one last question, because one of the things that I'm struggling with is where to find, historic information. I know there are places like Wikipedia and obviously that kind of thing, but what would you suggest would be go-to places to get information and to read up on this? Because what I find ends up happening in these situations is everybody has an opinion, and we're very quick to make statements like, oh, go and read up about it and create your own opinion. But if I'm reading news sources that I'm constantly reading, all I'm doing is reading information that already supports my belief. So and then I'm just going to form an opinion based on my existing beliefs. Where would you suggest that people go to read up, to challenge themselves, to make themselves uncomfortable, and to be in a position to ask more provocative questions?
I think in today's day and age, trying to find the truth is very difficult. I think intentionally so, because I'm sure politicians know if we understood fully what the truth was, they wouldn't have the power that they actually yield at the moment. So trying to unpack truth. And I think that is where I told you, Nicci, for me, I work in human rights all the time. I work in development. It's hard for me trying to uncover the truth. And this is literally a part of my daily job, that's trying to understand this landscape. So there's, I think the best way, and it's also something I use, and even with this war, I also had to step back and take my personal views out of this, is a lot of the information would sit on your UN type platforms. It's a lot of digging, though. It's not like they're going to say Ukraine and the issues. So it's a lot of digging that you have to do. Your criminal court, if you go to the International Criminal Court, it would have a list of the human rights violations. So whether people have been found guilty or not, that information still exists in that platform. And then comparing it to, I also always check out activism groups, because activists, whether you like what they're saying or not, are normally the one that digs a bit deeper to find out, okay, but why is the government saying this versus what we saw on the ground? So you would have to use a basis for, and why I'm using the UN is most of us are member states do that. So the information, I wouldn't always say it's accurate. It also sometimes is propaganda because they try to position a certain narrative, but using that information, using activist groups information, and then trying to find the truth in between there. Because as activists, we also have a narrative that we're trying to as much as we feel we don't, but we also have a narrative that we're trying to push. And I think it's the human in you. You want your point to come across, so you're going to give the information that supports what you are. I don't feel that the media is the place to try and find the information. I think it's been very clear that honest journalism has died years ago. But it's really trying to use multiple sources to try and find what the truth is. And most people don't want to do that because it's complicated, it's time consuming to actually try and understand all of those things. And a lot of this information isn't readily available because the minute I brought up petrodollar, the once in a conversation, everybody looked at me and I was like, is the US really going to have a website that says, oh, this is why we do things because we want to try and say,
petrodollar.com.
Yeah, so they literally not going to outwardly say this is what we're trying to do to you. So it's really about starting to think critically about matching history as well. We've all lived through history. We lived through Libya. We've lived through what happened in Syria. Using those things to try and understand and build a picture of what the truth is, because it's really not going to be on a platform somewhere saying this is the truth. Walk this way. It's not going to be, and even if someone did it, I'm sure they'll remove it in any event. So it's really using different platforms. Like I said, your UN is there, your International Criminal Court. There's a lot of these bodies that are there that have information. It's still going to require digging deeper though.
And I mean, Cindy, you did share, and I will share them in the comments of all of these live streams so that people can access them. Just in preparation for this conversation, Cindy did share 2 incredibly useful and insightful articles with me that I found that asked a lot of these questions, that poked holes in a lot of what I certainly had been reading. So I will definitely share those resources with everybody so you can access them. But I mean, the common theme that I'm seeing here, and that I see with, I think, all of my guests, which is why I love doing these interviews, it's this suspending your own opinions, putting your own opinions and your own thoughts aside and approaching things with an open mind, with a sense of curiosity, and exposing yourself to views that challenge your own. I mean, that's definitely, just while you've been speaking, Cindy, that's been kind of the underlying theme. Keep asking questions, keep challenging yourself, keep making yourself uncomfortable, and putting yourself in a position where you are asking the hard questions.
Definitely. And like I said, it's also just, I think, learning where to source the information from that informs us, because I feel a lot of these fights could be avoided if we actually had the truth.
Absolutely. So, Cindy, I've just gotten a question here from Tsepo, which I'm going to share. So he's asking, is it fair to call for the UNHQ to be quartered in a neutral country is the UN in the current format even effective for non-NATO countries? Do you have any thoughts around that or any comments on that question?
Very controversial opinion that I have of the UN, that I don't think they're neutral. They're heavily influenced by USA. They headquartered in USA. I don't think they are neutral at all. Same with the International Criminal Court. I don't think they're neutral bodies. If they were neutral, Britain, USA would have been prosecuted for everything they've done. And that is my basis for my opinion, is why are the biggest perpetrators of exploitation, human rights in the world, they haven't seen any consequences for what they've done. Yet they're the first to run to these bodies to say, but Putin can't do this. But you can. So I don't effectively think they're neutral. I do, however, think the policies that they have give us sufficient guidance on what is right and wrong. Not always, because I do sometimes think UN principles are based off Christianity and the West. And this came up for me in context of countries that, like Saudi Arabia, all of that. How do you go into a country with your own views, telling someone else the human rights violations when it's based off their religion? Who gives you the right to disrespect someone else's religion or faith? So I don't think they fully contextualize and take into account that, especially in Africa, Africans have this connection with our soil that they don't take into account, and it's always blown off as it's irrelevant. So I don't, like I said, short answers, I don't think they're neutral. I think their principles do, and I use it in my work as well. They do give us sufficient guidelines on what is right, what is wrong, how to correct things. So I'm not going to say they're completely irrelevant in the bigger scheme. I do think something needs to be done to the framework to even the scales, so that non-NATO countries, which is South Africa, actually has a voice in such an institution.
Because, I mean, just to clarify, and I know I'm sort of going right back to the beginning here. I mean, I know it's obviously North Atlantic, but in NATO, we're talking about countries north of the equator. I mean, it's definitely got nothing to do with anything south of the equator, but it does impact.
Yeah, it impacts us, but we're actually not part, and we're not protected by anything that they do. So yeah, like I said, I do think there is a need. And the odd thing is, Putin actually has raised the fact that he thinks there's a need for a different body that's actually neutral and gives a fair voice to the world. And like I said, I don't think that is UN. I really don't. I work in development, so like I said, my comments are very personal on this, because I work in development, and I really think they manage poverty in Africa. So I have a problem with what they proclaim to do versus what you see on the ground. But I do agree that their principles, their policies, their guiding principles, they really do give you a basis to do the right thing.
And I'm definitely seeing more and more conversations of late, and I mean, I don't know if it's just I'm noticing them more, but around this notion of so many of these frameworks and these policies are driven largely by Western countries, and they impact us, but they don't necessarily take into consideration the subtleties. I mean, we spoke about the subtleties and the nuances, and this becomes the gospel, for want of a better word, that gets implemented, but it's kind of taking less than a quarter of the world into account.
And I think that is what Putin, by what he's done now, is shaking. And that is the new world order is a different conversation that needs to be had. But I think that sparks what is happening right now. And the actual fear from the West is Putin has now come in and shaken what they have always had a stronghold on. And like I said, and that is why I want people to question, when they pick sides so quickly, question where we fall in on this, because effectively South Africa is part of BRICS. We don't have any enemies. We're not at war with anyone. We're not fighting with anyone. Really start asking questions around this, and why the West has so much influence.
No, that's very interesting. Cindy, thank you so much. This has been incredibly enlightening. I knew I would really enjoy talking to you, but I've actually enjoyed it more than I thought I would. Do you have any final thoughts that you would like to leave us with?
I just think I'd like people to be conscious of what's happening and actively actually try and find the truth. Because, like I said, I think what irks me about this is people just accept any information that they're given, whether it's right or wrong, and then pick a side. Because even in context with South Africa, you had so many people blowing up about why didn't we pick a side, not actually just going onto the DIRCO website to see, okay, what is your country's view actually on this? So what I just like is that, especially as South Africans, that we learn to actually identify what is true, what is factual, because you see it playing out a lot within the country also. And a lot of our fights automatically become racial, where effectively all of us love the country. All of us want the country to be good. So can we start asking the right questions so that we actually find solutions that are sustainable, but also works for everyone?
Oh, I love that. Thank you so much. That was, very insightful. And I think I'm going to write that one down and use it in something, and I may or may not credit you. I might steal credit for myself.
It's okay. But thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for your time and this discussion. I really have enjoyed it. Thank you all of you who listened in and asked questions, and to all of you who listen to this in future. Cindy, where can people get hold of you?
I am on LinkedIn. I'm not very good at replying, but I'll reply after a few days. But I think easiest is on LinkedIn because all my other accounts are private.
Okay, fantastic. And that's Cindy Ross on LinkedIn. Thank you so much, Cindy, once again.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, everybody, for listening, and I will see you all next week. Stay curious and stay safe. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.